and I am your moderator for tonight. Some of you were here last week, well, not last week, last session, where we kicked off with sort of defining spirituality as resistance. And tonight, we're going to think about reimagining safety and justice, spirituality, community care, and environmental resistance. And so, really thinking about the relationship between spiritual practice, community care, and this thing called environmental justice, environmental resistance, right? And actually honing in on an actual local context, which we will get into very shortly. So, we're going to also put it in the chat, but we would love if you would just tell us where you're zooming from. I imagine most of you are in the DMV, but you can tell us where exactly. And I would love to know your definition of what does environmental resistance mean to you. Keyword resistance, so not exactly justice, but resistance. And so really want to think about that. So you can put that in the chat, and while you do that, I'm gonna get us into some accessibility and community agreements, and then I'll come back and read what you put. So, just some brief notes on accessibility. Just always attend to your bio needs, except the speakers. Please stay. No, I'm just joking. Stretch, go to the bathroom, eat a snack, whatever it takes for you to be engaged. Remember, if you speak, you need to speak directly into the camera so that everyone can hear you. People with hearing loss sometimes have a hard time through the screen if you're moving your head a lot. If you turn your head sideways or too far, like I said, folks with hearing loss may have a harder time hearing you. You can turn on the caption feature if you need captions, and you can use the zoom feature to make images on the slide larger if you need bigger text. Our community agreements tonight use I statements. Let's focus on today's topic. Step up, step back. So if you want to ask a lot of questions, you need to step up, but also be conscious of how much space you're taking up and know when to step back. And then just be open to new ways of thinking, right? We have two incredible speakers today. Both have very interesting backgrounds that will add a lot of nuance to the conversation. So maybe the way you think about spirituality or environmental resistance is one way, and they may offer you some new medicine today. Look into the chat. Okay, nobody want to tell me where they from or what environmental resistance means to them. Y'all probably still cooking. It's okay. We all just got out of work and stuff, so I'm gonna give you some time. It's okay. Um, if you're not familiar with ESOC, our collective fosters critical consciousness and provides wellness tools for DMV college students and community members through transformative justice, Black feminisms, and care ethics. And this is our former cohort here on the right. Look at everybody, they're so cute. Exactly. Let me keep us moving. Oh, Oh, I thought it was somebody in the chat, but that's just the prompt again. Y'all really just don't want to answer my question. That's okay. Okay. Um, so for those of you who weren't here at the last session where we kind of grounded in our definition of spirituality, I'll read a little bit of our ethos. So here at ESOC, we have always talked about self-care. And now more than ever, we offer up spirituality as a way to think about fortification, fortification of the self, community, and the world. Our work, though still similar to past iterations, will now have spiritual ideology and practices woven into all offerings. In our practice, we refuse the collapse of spirituality into individualism, and in our methods, we refuse all systems of domination that harm Black peoples. Spirituality is where the past, present, future are one. You return to be in the now and in the future all at once, two ways of being and knowing that we cannot see. Um, and so I hope people feel seen in that definition and then just know that whatever way you define spirituality is valid in this space as well. Okay, so before I get us to our conversation today, in the title of this conversation, we talk about community care. And one of the things that's really important to us in ESOC is thinking about care and care ethics more expansively. Care is not innately good, right? And so these slogans, we must care, we got to understand that care, labor, and care responsibility is not evenly diffused. Right? And so when we're talking about the issues with our environment, when we're talking about environmental resistance, when we're talking about impact, who has to care for these people, right? Who has to do this labor? And what does it say about the broader systems of power? And so I definitely want folks to hone in on a definition of care that really refuses liberalism, like we said before, refuses individuality or individualism, and to actually think very concretely when we talk about resistance, who is doing what, right? When we get out of the abstract, what does it look like labor-wise? Whose bodies have to always do what? And I think that's really, really important. For some reason, the term care has been co-opted. And I think people, when they think of care, they think of like a spa day. That's not what we're talking about. And that's not what Audre Lorde was talking about, right? Audre Lorde had a lot to say about environmental factors that may have contributed to her cancer diagnosis. So when we really think about care and care ethics, we're also talking about broader questions. And so I just want to start us off with that so that we have more of a stronger understanding of what we're talking about. I see someone did put in the chat what their definition is. So we have someone who grew up in South Carolina. And this person says, when I hear the phrase environmental resistance, I think of the planet fighting against her exploitation. I imagine what it means to support the planet and be on her side throughout this destabilizing return to some sort of homeostasis while still protecting folks in the process. I really love that definition. I once heard an organizer say, the planet will be fine. Will humanity survive? And that simple reframing put the onus back on us to stop talking about this environmental collapse as an issue of the planet and actually an issue for us. So I like that a lot. All right, so I'm moving way faster than I thought, but that's okay. I told you a little bit about last session, so we grounded in what spirituality can mean for organizing work. We heard from three practitioners about their spiritual practices. We talked about having practices that are not connected to a particular faith, right? So we weren't necessarily talking about organized religion. And we ask people to take wellness and a care ethic seriously as they again refuse liberalism. And our beloved Juju Bay said the time to play was in 2019. She said game over, playtime over, crisis mode, resistance. She said the future don't got no playtime. And so really, what does that mean for our work? And what does this conjuncture require from us? Okay, I know y'all tired of hearing from me. I know y'all came for our wonderful speakers. So, I'm gonna get right into it. Don't worry, don't worry. So first, we have Destiny. Destiny uses they, she pronouns, is a Black queer organizer, multidisciplinary artist from the Black Belt region of Alabama. They are also the founder and executive director of Generation Green, a political home where the concept environmental liberation evolved into an ideological framework and movement. And then I'm going to also, and then if there's any way you all want to introduce yourselves, I will open it up for you to do that as well. Then next up, we have Brianna. Brianna also uses they, she pronouns, is a Black queer organizer, trainer, facilitator, and strategist based in Washington, D.C. Brianna, you from Landover though, right? You from P? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and so I am going to turn it to you both to also offer up more ways of the way you want to introduce yourself. What do you want people to know about you and your work?
I wanted to say Pretty Girl County. Is Landover in PG County? Right.
Yes, it is.
Pretty
Yes,
Girl
it
County,
is.
Pretty Girl County. I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing I would add is that I'm an artist. Yeah, so I make films, I make music, so I see the world through art. And a storyteller in that. Also somebody's daughter and granddaughter and great granddaughter. I was raised by my elders, so I'm also an elder. And I'm a student. Whew, I'm back at school, y'all. Yeah, so I'll add that.
I don't know that I have that much to add. I think, yeah, I come to this work through the Black liberation movements and what I've learned from the elders who taught me how to fight, how to be in struggle with my comrades, how to be in struggle with people who may not see themselves as my comrades right now, how to love my community, how to talk and be in community with my community, how to do the work that I do from that place and from a place of deep care and so how to also allow my righteous indignation and anger to drive me to action. And so I specifically come through the Black liberation lineage where we do community organizing that is also rooted in direct action. And to quote a comrade, a homie, someone I've learned a lot from because he's absolutely brilliant. And he's not Black. He is from South India, Gopal Dayanini, one of the founders of Movement Generation out in the Bay. If it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. And that's really what props me up in my work and in my beliefs.
I love that. And can you all say what your spiritual practice is before we get started?
Yeah, so we both practice Isheshe Lagba, which is a Yoruba traditional religion. I'm a priest of Egbe, Ifa, Obatala, and Eshu.
Wonderful. Okay.
And I also practice Ifa. I'm an initiate of both Ifa and Ogun. I'm a child of Ogun.
Love that. Okay. So we're gonna get right into it. If you all could both ground us in what environmental resistance or justice means to you, if you want to tell us if you think that there's a difference in those terms and how you got involved in this work. And then you can follow it up directly with how does your faith or spiritual lineage inform your approach to the environment?
I apologize in advance. If you see me yelling, I have two cats, which are also kids. I'm fussing a little bit. But to answer your question, I think for me, when I hear this question, I immediately think of actually defining environment. And I feel like we've been socialized in the West to see that as a very like external only nature thing, like trees and water. But in the environmental justice definition of environment, the environment is a complex set of like physical, geographical, biological, social, cultural, and political conditions that surround a person or an organism and ultimately determines whether or not they'll survive. So that's how I root myself in environment. And in terms of how I came to this work, when I saw you send this question, I was like, I don't think I came to this work in any particular way. I think I was just raised this way. And that's because I'm from a very rural, small town of about 500 people. It's not even an incorporated town, technically. And I was raised on family land, where this land used to be connected to a plantation that's less than a mile down the road. So I helped my great grandmother farm, like sweet potatoes, watermelon, peas, you name it. I was outside. I was sliding through mud puddles. I was riding horses. There were cows and hogs and like my eyes length. And I was raised by a family, and so whatever we needed, we got from the land or one another, or maybe the country store that was like less than a mile down the road. So I was raised in this very reciprocal relationship with land. Like give, you receive, and that was the basis of it. I also wasn't raised religious until I was like 12. So my understanding of environment was just to be in harmony, to be in relationship and to respect and steward. Like I was cutting grass in elementary school. So nobody else was going to take care of the land. We were going to do it. And it was all women. Like I come from a line of matriarchs. So there's that. And then when I think about environmental justice or environmental resistance, one, I think about the lineage of this work that I think oftentimes like people who are unfamiliar don't make the connections for. Like many people don't know that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was actually advocating for environmental justice when he was in Memphis during the time that he was assassinated, when he was in solidarity with sanitation workers. Like that's environmental justice because their working conditions were not sanitary and were very dangerous. And I also think about communities like Cancer Alley in Louisiana. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's like a 50-mile stretch that used to be plantations that's now filled with petrochemical facilities in terms of the fossil fuel industry. And just about everyone there has cancer or knows somebody who's died of cancer, right? Um, and in terms of justice, I think about the folks like the United Church of Christ who did the early studies in the 60s where environmental justice developed within and alongside civil rights so that folks could see that race is the number one indicator of whether or not you live next to a toxic facility or waste. I also think about environmental racism, which could be new for folks, meaning, again, that race is the number one indicator into whether or not you live close to waste or hazardous facilities. And that's very intentional. I think about heat islands, right? Like living in cities in an urban concrete jungle where if you live in like a neighborhood of color, you're more likely to have more concrete, less tree canopy, which means it's hotter or whether or not you live in floodplains. Like, I think about all of those things. And in resistance, I think about the long lineage of people who've used their spiritual traditions that are very innately environmental and connected to nature to actually defend themselves. So I think about the Black radical tradition. I'm thinking about Haiti, right? I'm thinking about the slave revolt that took place in Louisiana in the early 1800s. That was the largest. I'm thinking about all the people who have stewarded land.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that was such a beautiful answer. I'm sitting with so much of what you shared. I'm also sitting with this idea of having a reciprocal relationship with the land and how that's so Southern. I think there's something so specific to the South in that, if we're in the North American context, and like how capitalism has made people think that they don't have no relationship to the land in order to further the like exploitation. So like what does it mean to get people to see that they are in relation to something? Even if they don't think that they are. And so I'm very struck by you saying you got everything you needed from the land, but how people are taught to think if they buy it from the store that they're still not getting it from the land. Like, yeah, but I'm gonna turn to you, Brianna, so you can also answer the question.
No, word. I'm like, yeah, alienation, which is a tenet of capitalism, alienate us from each other, alienate us from our environment, from seeing that we are actually part of nature. And I think like I'm glad that Destiny brought up Martin Luther King, Church of Christ, all of these things are actually a part of our lineage. And I came to this work because this work isn't divorced from any of the other things that for me are necessary for Black people here and across the world to experience liberation, right? So they're part of the same thing, part of the same project, right? And so I see that my work, sometimes you fill out a survey and they're like, what do you do? Are you part of just Black liberation? Are you part of just racial justice movements? I'm like, oh, baby, I'm part of it all because it all impacts my people. And none of us are free until we're all free, right? And so that means that we're going to we got a lot of undoing to do. We got a lot of tending to do. We have a lot of resistance and resilience that we need to lean into, learn, and grow together in order to get to where we need to be, so we can be in right relationship with each other and with the environment, the world around us, and that it's not just the earth, it's not just the air, it's not just the water, but it's how all of these things are interdependent, right? And we learn about biospheres and biomes and not borders, but boundaries, right? Like where are the places where it turns from a swampland into a woodland, right? And what does that mean for how the different species who live along those boundaries interact with each other and what they see as where this makes sense for this to happen and it doesn't make sense for it to happen. It's what happens when something gets thrown out of whack. And I think that the balance, right, when you are connected to, okay, we're all in relationship with each other, right? Just like as humans, we're all in relationship with each other. Individualism doesn't work because we know that everything has an impact, not just for you, but for everyone and everything around you. The same extends to our broader environment, right? That there's an impact for every single thing. And I think about balance and how also within my spiritual practice, balance comes up. And that it is not good for me to lean too far in any one direction because I'm going to tip over and fall, right? But what does it mean for me to be in balance and right relationship with all of the different aspects in order to get what I need and also for the environment to get what it needs to sustain itself. So I see one balance show up. I see within my spiritual practice, we talk about the Orisha, we're talking about elements of nature around us, right? And how have they interacted in the past? What are some of the characteristics that we see? How do they get those characteristics, right? Where do you see yourself in the Orisha and in the elements around us? Where do you see them in you? And how do you understand that you're part of the same thing? We're all part of the same thing. It's like in science they teach you that there's no new matter created, right? Everything is recycled. So everything is recycled. So every single atom that I'm made up of was once maybe a cat, once just the air that someone breathed in, once an earthworm, once a beetle, once a leaf on a tree. I'm not divorced from these things because we're recycling the same matter over and over again, right? So I can't be separate from the environment, actually. I'm part of it. That's the only reason I exist. The environment only exists because I exist. I only exist because the environment exists. And there's a level of additional resilience that this broader ecosystem has, right? To the point of humans don't have to be here. The earth could be like, that's been enough. See you later, right? And we're just going to propagate some other life going on, right? And still, I am still an important part of the balance of the earth as it exists right now. And if it decides that it needs to go into another stasis or way of sustaining itself where things are in balance, then it will. And we seem to be inching our way towards that. And some of us are doing the work to try to walk some of that back, right? But as things are, humans are actually an important part of the environment, are an important part of keeping balance. We see that sometimes where it's like, oh, well, now we have too many deer, right? And that throws things out of line. And it like is important for people to learn those things because it helps to it has helped me to understand even more deeply that, like, when we talk about nature and environmental resistance, it's not just we have to save each and every one of these things. It's like the Lion King circle of life. You know what I'm saying? Everything, there's a balance to everything. And we need to actually lean into that. And we should be leaning into that spiritually and within our own selves because it keeps us in check, right? It keeps all of our, they used to call it humors before they really dove into the science of it all, right? But it keeps, if we were to use that, it keeps all your humors, right, at the levels they need to be for you to be operating as a functional person. And more broadly, right, it allows our broader ecosystem and world to function correctly. And so those are just some of the things that come up for me when I think about spirituality, and also just like what environmental resistance means to me and what that legacy has looked like.
I love that. I'm still sitting with the fact that you said, yeah, the planet can get humans up out of here.
Oh, certainly. I mean, plenty of species have gotten up out of here. So, and some of them have been like because of other influence, right? Humans have unduly contributed to the extinction of many species that maybe that would not have happened. And some of that's directly, some of it's indirectly. Like you think about how the brown rat through colonization was brought to all of these places that it did not exist before. The brown rat is up there with humans, they say, in terms of ability to adapt. And so there are some places that no longer have certain species of birds or bats or other things because brown rats will do their thing. And now, whatever. But like that's a thing that was propagated by humans, even if it's not directly that humans are overhunting this thing. But another thing around being mindful of how you move throughout the world and what comes with you as well.
I love that. Um, I'm gonna jump questions a bit because I wanna, you know, we've referenced a couple of things like Cancer Alley and this, that, but I want to kind of talk about where we live and where we're from for a second because the DMV is having a moment right now, a huge environmental resistance campaign against data centers. And so I would love, this question is for both of you. If you could just talk about what this, anti-data center campaign or campaigns reveal between profit, ecology, and the need for community care. Can you tell us about how the campaign is going? Like what's happening? And just what do folks need to actually know about this?
I can speak to data centers more broadly, Brown. I know you do work more so in the DMV, but data centers is the new frontier. It is definitely a new frontier, and I think more people are realizing it. It's not too late, but they're just now realizing it. And folks were warning for quite a while, actually. And there's now different environmental organizations saying, like, oh, we're the first national this, and this to take a stand. No, there's been local communities in all of these different cities across the country who've been on the front lines fighting for quite some time. I'm thinking about Memphis. I'm thinking about Virginia, which there's a county in Virginia, I'm forgetting the name of it, starts with an L, that literally has like 52 data centers. Yes, exactly. Insane. And so when it comes to data centers, like there's all types of impacts on human health. I mean, there's noise pollution, one. Many of these are built next to schools or in the middle of neighborhoods. There's also the energy factor. They use an insane amount of energy and water. If you hop on TikTok, I only say that because it's quick to find like real world examples, like people's experiences or reviews. But if you hop on TikTok and you Google data center in a city, like you'll very clearly see people turning on their water faucet and the stream of water is extremely reduced, like dripping, because the data center in their neighborhood is absorbing all of that. Not to mention pollution. And many of these data centers are now trying to turn back on coal-fired power plants that haven't been used in a decade to power them. Like the US was supposed to be moving off fossil fuels and oils, and there's the Trump administration and his attack on NEPA and Clean Water Act, which are very serious environmental policies that have protected us for quite some times from corporations, where now all of that is being dismantled. The EPA has been dismantled. I have personal friends and colleagues that have been fired. Well, we saw the layoff of a lot of federal workers earlier this year. The EPA was included in that. So I'm thinking about all of the health impacts of data centers, and people should know more because while AI, is sparkly and great, or it can be, it's really messing up our health and our environment because we're still reliant on fossil fuels and petrochemicals. And again, it's reviving infrastructure that was retired a long time ago. So yeah, but Brianna, I definitely want to hear more about what's going on at DMV from your perspective.
Yeah, I would add it's also straining infrastructure that we don't have. So one of the things that is actually when we talk about like national security concerns that I feel like the federal government doesn't come out and say this directly, but if you read anything in terms of vulnerability, it's actually our electric grid. It's outdated. It's overstretched and overstressed already. And so part of, right, I see people talk in the chat naming the hikes in electricity bills, people in PG County being like, actually, my bill jumped to three, four, $500, and what? I haven't used three, four, or $500 worth of energy this month. And some of that is because, well, now you're adding a center, or depending on where you live, a bunch of centers that are running 24/7 in order to, I don't know, help Trump make a random video where he's dropping poop on protesters. And it's like pulling more energy from the grid. And there's a whole, maybe I'll send this over, Monet, to you, just some of the recordings of data center task force hearings where they talk a little bit more about the energy exchange locally and what it means for each region to bid into the exchange and then determine the price of energy. That all contributes to how energy bills shoot up. But to begin with, we actually don't have the infrastructure to accommodate the energy requests that we already have, much less additional requests from large data centers like the one that is being proposed at the old site of Landover Mall, Bricey Road, in Landover, which is where I'm from. That would be the largest one on the East Coast. Um, and so that's one thing to AI, sparkly, flawed, and a lot of folks at this point think that AI is a bubble. It is similar to like the early dot-com era. If you're thinking about the early 2000s, I was just telling someone about the movie Fun with Dick and Jane, which kind of makes fun of, in a way, the Enron crisis. I'm dating myself in terms of my age, but like when Enron and a lot of early internet companies collapsed because they actually weren't really selling anything, and they had losses that they were hiding, right? So we have an industry that a lot of folks have bought into, that actually are not turning a profit. But it's speculation. So if you aren't clear what speculation is, it's the same thing that means that a house can be vacant on your block, right? And someone buys the house, but no one ever moves in. And then 15 years later, what used to be a $280,000 house is now up for sale for $750,000 or more, right? So it's called speculation, where someone acquires something, they sit on it, and the idea is to pump up the value of it until they can make money on it. So that's where the profit piece comes in. Um, One, that is something that happened with the Landover Mall site. So I grew up literally across the street from Landover Mall in Maple Ridge Apartments. So that also tells you about zoning laws because I mean, across you walk across the street, and that's where Landover Mall was, right? Um, and that mall closed when I was a child. And the it has sat vacant for over 2 decades at this point. And only now is the learner development company, Learner Family, saying that now they want to make it into a data center. And so one, that is like another case study in speculation and what happens when we're not in right relationship with the environment and with the land, and we're not using it as part of our community, right? That space for over 20 years could have been a generative space in a bunch of different ways for the Landover community where the income is lower than in other parts of the county, especially we're talking about PG County, that's known as the most affluent Black county in the United States. Landover is not counted in that, all right, as someone who grew up there. And so it could have been a generative space for our communities for over 2 decades, especially to address all of the things that they say. We want to address crime. We want to address people's opportunity to get good jobs. We want to address the financial insecurity and instability that people face, but not at the cost of turning down profit motives, right? Which is why they sat on that land for that long. And also because people don't like Black people and Landover's Black. And as plenty of people always say, every nice thing you think we should have in the United States, we don't have it because they don't want Black people to have it. Um, so that is part of the thing. And now they want to poison the Black community. And other folks have also moved in since then by putting a data center there because they're saying there's a crisis in terms of profit. We're losing the Commander Stadium, right? The Commanders are going to be moving back to DC. It mimics some of the other shifts that have happened in Landover before in terms of large infrastructure projects that have brought in revenue that then went away, and the county is scrambling to gain revenue. But one, we're talking about, again, the most affluent Black county in the US. So I know there's money somewhere to be gotten, right? Two, we're talking about a group of people making, and I'm glad that folks mentioned this in the chat earlier when asked about what environmental resistance means, making decisions based on convenience and what's quick, but not what's sustainable, not what's actually real, and not what is going to last and actually be beneficial to residents. So at this point, they have a data center task force that will be submitting its recommendations to PG Council. Folks who've been working on the No Landover Data Center campaign are also working on their own community report because we already know it's going to be nonsense. I went to the meeting, the town hall at the Sports and Learning Complex, and there were plants at every table to try to talk to us about how great data centers were. And then, people were like, actually, I already know that data centers are not good. This is framed in a leading way of, well, what can we do to mitigate the environmental impacts? What can we do to mitigate your concern about that and mitigate your concern about that? And the resounding answer from residents is don't build it. That's the only way to mitigate it. You can't you can't mitigate air quality issues, water issues, noise pollution issues by saying, well, we'll give you a community benefits agreement or 50 people will get jobs temporarily, right? That's short-sighted, one. And two, it's not worth the health and well-being of hundreds of thousands of people, of even millions of people, because again, we're all connected and everything impacts each other. And so that's a little bit about where the campaign is now. Happy to drop more information about how people can get involved, what you can sign up for. And I want to, again, I think just tying it back to spirituality, I'm thinking about like faith and believing in what we can't see right now, but what we know is possible. And my largest challenge, and something I spoke on at that town hall when we forced them to let us speak, was that I know that we can imagine better, we can come up with better, we can come up with things that are going to cover all of the tax revenue that we need in order to meet people's needs in this county that isn't a data center. That's someone else's idea. And they have that idea because they have an interest in profit. They don't have an interest in the people. But I know that we're much more creative than that. We have been out of necessity. I know that we're much more skilled than that. I know that we actually have everything that we need in order to create the kind of future where we can take care of ourselves. We can cover all of the needs that folks have. People are going to need to eat, people need housing, people need childcare, and that all costs money, and I understand that. And we can cover that, but on our own terms. And we have what we need in the community to come up with those solutions. I'll also make sure there's a link that's sent that gives people the opportunity. What would you like to see at the Landover Mall site instead of a data center? Because that's actually what we need to lean into, that creativity, that faith that something else that we have yet to see can happen. We can dream it up and create it together, right? But like that faith is even why any of us even exist right now. Certainly the only reason I exist, because my folks who are from Virginia, are from Madison, Virginia, in the country, right? Could not, did not see, not could not, they could through faith see, right, where I could be right now. And that wasn't their conditions at the time, but they could see it, they could dream it, and they could begin to act towards it. And that's the only reason why I exist. And so I know we can do the same in order to create a better situation and set of conditions for ourselves and for our people. And so I just want to encourage us to also be thinking creatively. There's a lot of ancestral and indigenous wisdom that we need to call upon. And then there's a lot also that our ancestors want us to reimagine and recreate because we live in a different world. And so what else can we dream up? How can we push their faith and their dreams even further than they could in the moment in order to get ourselves to where it is we need to go, in order to remake the world that we live in and be able to carry it forward from here, from the conditions that we currently exist in?
Whew, you both offered us so much. I think, Brianna, when you were talking, when you said I'm a part of all of it because it's all connected, what comes up for me, at least coming from an RJ background, is this is a reproductive justice issue. Like, what does this mean for infant and maternal mortality? What does this mean for reproductive health? Like, how much more can Black people take? And I think what is so devastating about this proposal in Prince George's County is it really speaks to the Black misleadership class. These are Black people offering us up.
Right.
These
Okay,
are
now.
Black council people who even live here who are offering us up. And it just really speaks to the fact that we can't afford any more identity reductionism. What's the ideology? What is the ideology? You can't be up there just because you Black. Because look at what they do. And I was, when I watched the videos, the resistance to letting you all speak. These are our people. It reminds me of when Patrice Douglas said there's always a white person in the room, even if there's no white people in the room. And that is what I see in that campaign. I'm also thinking about when we really need to talk about what I call the trenches of PG, because this idea that everyone here is rich is harming the Black people who are not. There is a deep class divide, Black class divide in Prince George's County. And we have to think about, why did they choose to make the first data center in Prince George's County in Landover?
And we know why.
We know why. You would never do that to Woodmore.
Definitely not.
You would not start at Woodmore.
Nope.
They tested out that Six Flags area, but that's still Bowie.
That's right. That's right.
So it's like this is about class
That's
just as
right.
much as it is about race.
That's right.
And
And
so
mhm.
I just think when we talk about resistance, we're gonna be resisting a lot of our own people, a lot
And
of our own people, and this campaign is showing it.
mhm.
Um, whew. So I'm just I'm gonna go back to you, Destiny, for a second. If you could talk about some of the campaigns and some of the work being done at Generation Green more broadly that impacts like what are more environmental concerns of where we are of the DMV?
Yeah, I want to answer a question in the chat too, because I was also typing some things. I personally don't think electoral politics is the answer. It's a tool, it's a tactic, that works for some people, it's part of it, but that's not for me to directly answer your question. And there are wins happening right now. Georgia just flipped 2 seats for their public service commissioner, which has a big impact on their utilities. For those who don't know, uh, you don't like directly control your public utilities. If you didn't know that, like your energy companies, there's more so processes that happen behind closed doors and elected officials, which is the Public Service Commissioner who set the regulations for the state and who are oftentimes bought out like other politicians in favor of the electric companies. So Georgia just flipped 2 seats, which is going to do great things for them because Atlanta has a similar situation with data centers. Atlanta got a lot going on. But in the South, there's Southern Company, which is an energy monopoly that controls energy companies in Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama. It's like all under the same company, and then they split it into, yeah, it's a mess. I grew up under Alabama Power, which is a division of Southern Company, which is also a very old racist. Let me not get too deep into that, but it's a very racist history. And then also Michigan just passed. A law. I can't remember the name of it right now. I'll find it and put it in the chat where they're actually requiring data centers to pay upfront for the infrastructure and taking the burden off of consumers. And some of what Brianna was talking about, and I put in the chat, like the reason people's bills have been skyrocketing is many reasons, right? There's the amount of power being used, the amount of water being used, and there's the infrastructure that they need to build out, and they don't want to pay for that themselves. They want you to pay for that. So in Michigan, they just passed a law again where they're requiring data centers to put up the money and they can't charge consumers. And so a lot of data centers that were proposed in Michigan actually just pulled out. So that's legislation that's showing that it is possible. But again, just an example. In terms of what's happening with Generation Green, I realized earlier that I didn't talk about like my student organizing background and getting into the work also. So I came to this work because I'm Southern as hell and I was raised on the land and I love Animal Planet, National Geographic and films and things. And um, because I was a student organizer at Howard University and the administration, like many university administrations, was a mess. And trying to hold them accountable and learning more about environmental justice and what was going on in DC. Like there's data centers, and then DC has a lot of other things going on around like flooding. As we think about the impact of the climate crisis on the world, but especially like the Northeast, the United States, like hurricanes are coming up here now, if you didn't notice that. And they're getting worse and they're going to keep coming up here. And sea level rise is happening, so all of your coastal cities will flood. And DC is in the Bay, so it will flood even more and worse than it does now. But in the midst of doing that, I realized that environmental justice was a thing and was like, oh. And then I ended up at an internship at a big green organization, which is like, think about your large nonprofits that suck up most of the money in philanthropy and claim to be doing work for communities then not doing it, and they're also really racist towards their employees and have a long racist history because we can't talk about like environment and the movement without talking about how it's been whitewashed, and Black people and people of color have actually been like removed from that. And so and some of the things that we talked about earlier, Brianna, you were saying like people are like, oh, which part of movement are you a part of? To me, climate and environmental movement is like all encompassing. And that's not conflating things. That's just like it really acknowledges the interconnectedness of everything. Um, and what the hell are we gonna fight for if we don't have a planet to live on? Like we'll all be dead, like, So I think about that. But also my point was these large organizations consume all this money and are extremely racist to people. And I saw that firsthand. It was like, oh hell no. I'm not doing that. I don't want anybody else that I know to do that. And so I started Generation Green with a bunch of HBCU students from across the country who are doing environmental things. Shout out to the HBCU Climate Change Conference that takes place in New Orleans every year. Dr. Robert Bullard and Dr. Beverly Wright, who were very much early founders of the environmental justice movement or large supporters thereof, and then started Generation Green. But in the process of that, we were like, yo, what does environment mean to us? what does environmental justice mean? What does justice mean in a country where we were never even considered citizens? Like, what is justice? How can you attain that from a state that like actively seeks your demise and using your labor in a particular way? And so then we were like, yeah, we have to like decolonize the way we think about environment in general, but also the way we think about justice and acknowledging the limitations of that. So then we started, thinking up, dreaming, study, scheming, all the things. Shout out to some people that are here. Also, Jalen, I saw that she's in the chat. And we dreamed up Generation Green together, which started as like a network for young Black people to connect in this work because we didn't really see a lot of each other. Y'all know how it is in movement spaces, like the old guard per se, and they don't want you to do this and that. You got to stay in the bounds. And we're like, yeah, whatever, all of that. We're not doing respectability politics. We want to get into what this means and to talk about what this means for the global Black and African diaspora, because this is not a US thing. This is a global thing, the climate crisis that is, and environmental racism is a global thing. The reason that we're in the climate crisis isn't just because like, oh, we eat too much of this or we don't recycle. No, this is based off of like hundreds of years of colonialism, and environmental degradation is directly connected to the oppression of people. Like they go hand in hand. Capitalism and racism develop side by side in the context of global racial capitalism, and that includes land theft, again, environmental degradation, enslavement, all of this. Like the resources that were being taken from the land alongside us and our bodies directly connected and interlinked. So as long as we oppress the environment, we'll be oppressing people. As long as we oppress people, we'll be oppressing the environment because it's people, profit, and profit is always put over people in this system.
Yeah.
So Generation Green, again, started as that network, but then developed more so into an ecosystem where young Black people who are doing climate and environmental work across the world can connect and just share ideas and share campaigns and strategies. Because again, what's happening here in the Gulf South, we have like a Cancer Alley. Many of the companies that are polluting there are also polluting in Brazil, right? I think about like Total Energies. They have things in the Gulf South. They also have companies in Brazil. There's also in East Africa. Like these are the same companies, right? Like when we think about Chevron and Exxon and all the terrible things that happened in the Niger Delta in West Africa, and then we think about the oil spill that happened in the Gulf, right? Directly connected. So how do we connect people who are doing this work, especially in very like liberatory ecology ways, which again make that direct connection between oppression of land and people? How are we connecting? How are we building strategies? How are we showing like, here's what worked for me. I took on this coal-fired power plant and we did this, this, and this company has these people. And then you connect with folks in the Gulf South who are doing the same thing. And it's like, oh, shoot, we can link up and put the pressure on them together. That seeing that play out and seeing people build relationships across the world has like changed my life. And it definitely backed up that this is not just like a global North issue. And I never thought that, but there are people that do. There are very,
Yeah.
let me be clear, there are white people that do. There are
Yeah.
white people that think this is only about them and that this is their movement solely because this is the only thing that seems to affect them.
Hmm.
Right. And that's just not the reality for us. So that's some of the work that Generation Green has been doing. We're launching a healing fund in quarter 1 of this coming year to support Black folks who have struggled in the climate environmental movement. Right now, there's been like funding pulled out drastically under this administration. So again, y'all know what happened with laying off federal workers, the dismantling of the EPA. There were a lot of Black people that worked in the EPA, a lot of Black women, to be explicitly, who have been out of work for months, right? And on top of that, these organizations, I think in 2020, we saw in different movements, like people being like, oh, we're racist, sorry. White guilt money or whatever. Let's drop an article, a statement on the website just to say we're sorry and acknowledge the thing. Well, that happened in the climate environmental movement too. And so now you're seeing people kind of like revert back, like, oh, we can't say that. We don't want to lose our funding. And so people are getting fired as a result. So we're starting healing funds and healing circles, to your point of care ethic, to make sure that people actually have a space to talk, that there are circle keepers, that there are therapists, that they can have access to a fund where they can take a retreat, go to the spa, whatever they need to do to take care of themselves. So I think that's a major part of it. And the last thing I'll say that I think is critical is when we talk about like environmental liberation, which is our ideological framework, it notes that like global racial capitalism is the problem. It's not overconsumption alone. It's not this alone. It's connected to this lineage, right, of exploitation. And that stopping that, like changing our economic and political system is the only way that we're going to get out of this alive, hopefully. And acknowledging, and I think this is one of your questions, so sorry if I'm getting ahead, that the countries that are most impacted by the climate crisis are the countries who contribute the least and who have
Yeah,
been exploited and colonized for the longest. Like Hurricane Melissa that just happened in the Caribbean was as massive. Like I don't know if y'all saw the plane, the storm chasers, which that's a really interesting career, but that flew inside of the eye and you're looking up at like the wall, like that's more than 100-year storm. And now we're having them like every 3 to 5 years. That's extremely concerning. And it was that big because the temperatures in the Caribbean are like 2 degrees Celsius warmer than they normally are. I'm sorry, I could rant, but there's just a lot going on and it's
yeah.
all connected.
You kind of touched on the question, which was, yeah, how is the Caribbean being impacted by environmental choices happening in North America? But I think I want to pose a different question and thinking about, because one of the questions is like, without fear mongering, what does it actually mean to prepare for these things? And I think people think that any gesture towards preparation is giving in to fear. But it's like, this is our reality. We are here. Why don't you have emergency, if you can afford it, of course, why don't you have emergency flood things in your house? Emergency hurricane things in your house, right? Like, why aren't we thinking about this? But to go back to this broader context, we tend to think that we need to create something new in preparation. But what are ways that people in the Caribbean are already living with the land and are already adjusting or have had to adjust that we are looking at? I have friends, organizer friends from South Africa who jokingly say, prepare for those long power outages. Welcome. Right? And they're like, welcome. Like some of the things we talking about are ways Black people already have to live, conserving rainwater, et cetera, et cetera. So if you all want to just jump in and just talk about what are some of those, but not in a romanticizing way, but like what are the ways that we have to change the way that we live because of this that we need to actually learn from the global South, the Caribbean, the continent, all of that.
Yeah, I think we need to have a sober view and assessment of our landscape, where we're vulnerable to, based on where we are, and then what that means in terms of what we actually need and what we don't. A lot of things are really cute. They're really fun. It's fun to have power all the time. I enjoy it. I'm not gonna hold you, you know what I'm saying? And yes, when I was in South Africa, they did say, okay, baby, and guess what? From this hour to this hour, it's our turn to cut off all the power and you're fine. Everything's fine. You know what I'm saying? And if you have, and that's not to say that we don't have other mechanisms, right? Some people rely on machines in order to stay alive. There are ways that we can tend to all of those things. What does it mean to have generators? I'm down to talk to people about solar power generators and what that means and how big of one might you need in order to power certain things, right? But what I don't need TikTok, during those 6 hours. I can find something else to do with my life, right? Saving rainwater. Now, we do live in an interesting place where in a lot of places that's illegal. And we can talk about that in a different way, right? But what does it actually mean to be clear on what are our basic necessities and what can we survive with? And then what are the things that are extra? Because there's a lot that we may have to learn to do without. And that's okay. We've gotten used to it. It's comfortable. It's not necessary. There are people who thrive all the time without access to a whole bunch of things that people have gotten accustomed to, and it is comfortable, right? But that comfort is part of like that lulls you into convenience, right? This is convenient. It's more convenient for me to buy this thing that I throw away every single day that's made out of whatever, right? Than to actually just reuse this thing. It's just more convenient. So then I'm going to do it. No, break up with that. Break up with convenience. Boo, tomato. Convenience often takes us down the road of wastefulness. And that's just the world that we live in at this point, in part due to capitalism, due to chasing profit, due to wanting people to consume more and more. And so there's a level of overconsumption, but like, what is our relationship to things? We don't need new clothes all the time. I don't need 25 new vases just because I saw it and it's cute. That's a mental thing that I have to check for myself. I love window shopping online. I don't buy a lot of stuff if you know me, but I do a lot of window shopping. And I also know that at some point I have things just to have things. What am I trying to fill? What's underneath that? Because it's pretty and what else? That some things have a life cycle. It may break at some point. I'll replace it. I'll get another one. Great gowns, beautiful gowns, exactly. But I don't need to be someone who is like in a compulsory way, acquiring more and more things. I don't need to, in the same way that like, we're like, oh, there's food there. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to eat it. Are you hungry? No? Okay, well, maybe chill out. Like, what are we doing and what for? And the underlying need, a lot of times is that we're trying to fill a different need that we have going on. And we're not either conscious of it or we don't feel like we have what we need to actually address it. And so we start filling it with a bunch of things, right? But the things are never going to fill it. The things haven't filled the hole that people, the capitalists, the large hole they have, right? Which is why capitalism is consistently in crisis and consistently trying to remake and reimagine itself and hedge on something else that's based on something else that's based on something else and a bunch of numbers that are actually based on thin air, right? We can talk about the 80s and the stock market and derivatives and how that gets wild because that's when we start really getting into, oh, y'all are betting on bets on bets. That's not based in anything. But it is trying to like chase something that capitalism can never fill. One, because infinite growth isn't possible. I named at the beginning that we live in a closed system. Not possible, right? Or as some people say, we call that a cancer in the medical field. If something's just like growing wildly and out of control. And we're like, we got to stop that. Um, but I think we have to break up with convenience in that way. We have to break up with compulsory, like just doing things mindlessly in that way, and actually be in tune with the environment around us and know it. Do you know your landscape? Do you know your nearby watersheds? Do you know which plants and which animals and living things are actually native to where you are? Do you know what's invasive and what's not, and the impact of invasive species? Would you know where to go? And then do you know the people who live around you, right? So everyone doesn't have the money to buy a go bag. Everyone may not have the money to stock up on a bunch of canned foods and items. But what if we pool our resources together and we have something? And you know that if something were to go down and we've done our threat assessment, that you can come to my house or I'm going to your house, whatever our plan is, and we can practice being with each other ahead of time so that everyone doesn't have to feel isolated and unclear when something happens. That's another thing that is practiced in other places, right? Because they've had to do that in order to survive. And we live in the belly of the beast, right? And so we're taught that that's neither good nor should you do it. And capitalism alienates you from other people. And so we're not in that practice, but we got to get back to it because it's actually the only way that we'll survive anything. And so familiarizing yourself, doing some sober assessments, and actually being in practice around the things that you know you're going to have to embody moving forward are the only things that are going to keep us going because yes, the front lines are in the Caribbean. They're in the Pacific Islands. And that's why you see those folks you like I remember growing up and they'd be like these people who have never been on planes before, indigenous to Fiji, are now showing up at this climate hearing, right? Because it was desperate then for them, right? And still is, right? And folks are still fighting to be able to stay where their ancestors have been for thousands of years. And because we've surpassed these levels where people have already identified if the earth warms by this amount of degrees, it's going to be a dire situation. Yes, now we're feeling it too. And so we have to adjust.
Oh, thank you both. Um, so we had a question in the chat that I want to get back to, and it says, do you all believe that it's possible to fight back and win against tech and the fossil fuel giants? Did we answer this already? Through the electoral
I
policy?
think Destiny was getting there.
I somewhat addressed it and gave some wins, but I said
Okay.
it's a mechanism.
I mean, I can follow up. I think that there, I'm a fan of using all the tools. You know what I'm saying? We got a big toolbox, baby. And if there were only one pathway, if we already knew exactly what needed to be done, baby, it would have been done. We're not all organizers now because we're suddenly so much smarter than everyone else who's come before us. It's because we have to keep innovating and our conditions shift and they adapt to what we're doing. Notice when they co-opt our language, when they co-opt our tactics, right? And now they're like, oh, we're with you. We did what you said to do, right? No, we need a lot of people working from different areas and aspects to throw in to weaken the systems while we build our people up, while we organize and build our power in order to overhaul things and actually bring about that just future, that just transition, that liberated future that we want. And so electoral politics can be part of it. Destiny spoke to some of that. Community organizing is part of it. Building community pods, knowing your people, the basics of safety, right? The basics of community care. Do you know who lives around you? Do you know your people? Who are your people? Do they know that they're your people? Are y'all each other's peoples, right? That's part of it. And, if you feel called in the way that I have, sometimes speaking of Cancer Alley and like how it actually extends all the way over even to Texas, right? Sometimes you put your body on the line. For me, that has meant taking action. In 2019, was a part of a team that shut down the largest port for fossil fuels in North America, in Texas, right outside of Houston, by putting our bodies in the way for a day, hanging off of a bridge to do that, right? And so for me, that's part of my calling. And like that's sacred to me that I feel called by my people, by what I know to be true and right and just to be willing to hang from a bridge for a day in order to block it from happening. And so we need all of the tools and even more, probably ones that I couldn't imagine, in order to, yes, bring about that just future. And I do believe that we can win because that is what undergirds my ability to stay in this fight. I know we can win, and we just actually have to do it. People talk about I think I remember Obama, and I think it was his first inaugural speech, he was like, "Oh, and I know that the arc of history bends toward justice, and the thing is we have to bend it. It doesn't bend on its own. It relies on us to do it. And so the action is what's important."
Mhm. And I have a I have a colleague in my department who their name is Zuri Arman, and they always say, even if we're fighting a losing fight, we still do it. And I think that to me puts on the table the fact that there are so many people before us who did try and failed. And the gesture is still equally as important. How many slave revolts failed? Like,
And
right?
there's no
Like,
shame in failing. So many people don't take action because they're afraid to fail. There's no shame in failing at
mhm,
all, ever,
mhm,
right? There's no shame in fighting for your liberation and fighting for better for you and for your people.
mhm,
It's never something to be ashamed of, and it's never a reason for us not to try. We
mhm,
always need to push forward.
mhm, mhm. I agree. Um, okay, I want to open it up to questions, more questions from the audience, just because I'm thinking about the sake of time, and I actually want to give folks more time than they had last time. So you can start to put your questions in the chat a bit more. And I will look at them. But in the meantime, I think the last question that I'll put on the table is how can students and organizers, we kind of touched on this, but how can students and organizers and community members integrate spiritual practices into campaigns addressing environmental and social harm? What are some practical things we can do to make environmental justice a possibility? Like for those people who really like that practical, what can they do?
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking about all the things that Brianna just said, and I'm like, yeah. Also, shout out to you for hanging from a bridge, because hey, that ain't everybody's ministry. Shout out
It's
to you.
not, and I do it because I know it's mine, and you got to be in your calling, baby.
Hey, period. Before answering your question, Monet, I do want to go back to what you were saying about like how we can be prepared. I know it's scary, but I actually really encourage everybody here to look into researching the climate impacts in your locale. Because if you don't know, you don't know, right? And I know everybody's like not in the DMV, like people are calling you from different places. So actually look at it, y'all, because what could happen in the next 50 years is very scary. But like if you're just living life and you don't know, when it hits, you're gonna be like, oh shit. Like what we saw happen in Texas when folks were literally freezing to death in their homes. I'm just being very transparent. That's going to happen more often because we have a government that does not care about us and an economic system that does not care about us beyond our labor. So I just really encourage you to get familiar and yes, know your neighbors and pack a to-go bag if you can afford to do it. Because I grew up and maybe, yeah, this is really just being Southern. We were always ready. Not necessarily for climate, because folks didn't know about that then, but there was a gun, there was money in a bag somewhere. You always kept your car on like half a tank of gas. Like so look into it, be prepared, and also look into resilience hubs. There are many resilience hubs developing across the US and some that have been existing for a long time, like nowhere to go in an emergency. So a lot of churches are resilience hubs, meaning like if there's a hurricane or something, like they'll have power for you. They'll have food for you. That's a place to go. I'm also thinking about organizations like the Smile Trust in Miami. Shout out to V, Valencia Gunder, holding it down and like trucking in resources whenever there's a hurricane and hosting people in their office and things of that nature. So please look into, I know the science is scary, but like you actually have to know. And I'll say that the movement definitely has a narrative problem. That's why it's been whitewashed the way it has been. That's why people don't want to look at the facts. Like we have a narrative issue. But to the point of how folks can um, incorporate spiritual practices and grounding into their campaigns, I think it really starts with your values and understanding of environment, like going back to that definition earlier. And I just really want to be clear about environmental justice. Like in terms of definition, that is like seeking redress from the state. That is only one, pathway. Like justice means like I'm seeking some form of reparation for this harm. And then there's the reality of like this should happen to no one. Like the literal definition of environmental justice talks about like an equal burden. Nobody should have the damn burden. So I also want to be clear in that framing. But I think it starts with values, like personally, and shout out to Rachel, who I see on this call. Like we schemed together at Generation Green. Lands and the elements are sentient and have agency. And if you have that like outlook, that just immediately changes how you interact with your environment. Like you're more intentional. You see more of an extension of yourself as having like, again, agency, right? Like part of being an Ifa and Orisha priest, like we literally consult the divine. We're communicating consistently with the divine. And part of the work that I'm doing with my thesis is like, what does it mean to talk to the priests who talk to the elements all the time about the state of the world that we're in? Like, I've talked to Trinice. Well, she was very clear about what is happening, right? And why we're in the predicament we're in because we've lost our respect for nature. We've lost our respect for the divine. Like, we're made of water and you disrespect water. Like, like much of it is our actions, and I'm not putting the onus on individual people. I'm just saying that if you want to incorporate and get serious about honoring the environment and honoring spirit, then you should start there with like where you place your value. And then also like go and get to know your local watershed. Like Brianna mentioned, like talk to the water. Like water, I say water because I have a unique experience with water, but the water is your friend. Okay. Like, I don't know, you ever take a shower and you're like, I feel so peace of mind, calm, renewed. Right. Like that's the power of water. But yeah, go and get to know your local water sources, your rivers. And in that, you'll probably notice what's going on in your environment. Like, oh, there's a lot of trash over here. I wonder if that's impacting this, and this, right? Or like, oh, this water is polluted actually. Should I even be drinking my local water source? Like as you get to know your environment, then you get to know how it's impacting you. Why? Because it's all interconnected and interrelated. So those are some of the things that I think about in terms of how to incorporate that. And truthfully, I think it goes beyond like a land acknowledgement and a prayer. Like no shade to that, right? But it goes beyond that. Like how are you actually treating the environment? How are you actually communing with the environment and doing the research? I don't know. Niggas don't want to read no more. Like, just look it up. I'm just being honest.
Unfortunately, it's because a lot of people can't if you look at
And
the
that's also
statistics.
very true.
But yeah.
And that is very intentional. But do the research, y'all. Like, just you don't gotta read also. There's videos. We in a digital age. But but yes, do the research too.
Hey. Another question that we got is while we are near nonprofit infrastructure, with the current nonprofit lawfare and compounding threats, what do the panelists envision for resilience?
We gotta get scrappy. We didn't always have the backing of nonprofit structure, and people did a lot. In some cases, they did a lot more than we're able to do now.
Mhm.
And I understand the purpose of it. I work at a nonprofit. I've worked at a bunch of nonprofits at this point. Yeah, there are ways in which it can be very helpful. And there are ways in which it has served as a replacement instead of an additional thing for our movements, for our people. And that's not helpful. And in an environment where people who are doing righteous work are under attack and being labeled as domestic terrorists and everything else under the sun, what we have to get back to is what it looks like for us to, one, make sure you're in the work for the right reasons. Because you love your people, because you love the place we call home, and because you are doing your best to fight for both, right? And make sure that we're all able to be in right relationship with each other, environment included, earth included. And therefore, what is it that we need to do? How do we need to organize ourselves that is outside of what the state's business is and is not? How do we resource ourselves outside of what the state's business is and is not? And that's a practice that we have had because people have had to have it, right? People who were running away to freedom in different stops on the Underground Railroad, they ain't had no C3. Okay. It wasn't a thing. Wasn't no fun. And it wasn't the C3 funds wasn't coming through for that for sure, right? But people figured out how to network with each other, how to get resources to wherever they needed to be, how to be in relationships with each other without even cell phones, right? And so we need to get back to being that level of scrappy before things were really nice and like Destiny said, people pretended to care for a little while and gave us some money around it. Yeah, compass, printed maps, pay some dues to an organization you care about because you care about them and you want their work to be sustained, right? You know, their work benefits us all. Feed somebody, watch somebody kids while they go to a meeting, while they go do a thing. What are all the ways, right? Again, we're just getting back to community basics, right? What are all the ways that we support each other and support group and community projects to push us to wherever it is we need to go, to do the work that we know needs to be done? And we can still do that outside of that system. And as people are under attack, we can be smart about where we do and don't engage with the state, as well as how we protect people who are doing the work and how we make sure that they are not swept away with whatever the federal government or local and state governments decide that they want to do because it's beneficial for their agenda at the time.
Hmm. Thank you for that. Oh, Destiny, you wanna jump in? Oh.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would add, and I know it's Jalen who a asked this question, and shout out to Jalen. Like the solidarity economy, I think, like when we think about economics and different times in history where people had to be resilient. I mean, yes, there was enslavement, there was colonization, and like more recently in people's brains, like I think about Black cooperatives in the U.S. and how Black people have such a history of just banding together and taking care of one another, right? Like explicitly, I recently learned about Crejon Social Club, which was in Minnesota, and they literally started right before the Great Depression, like 1927, somewhere around there, and had a credit union and was able to still give out loans in the midst of the Great Depression. And why was that? Because, well, white people were racist and we couldn't have our money in their banks anyways, flipped on them, but also because they band together and had a solidarity economy and supported each other with resources like susus. I'm also thinking about folks who do that, or like even my own family who, in the middle of Jim Crow, got land and then employed other Black farmers so that people wouldn't have to be sharecroppers and tenant farmers and like actually make a livable wage. So how are we resilient in times of crisis? Because to be clear, we're in a time of crisis. Like when you think about climate change, it's the climate crisis. We're in a crisis. Okay, we've been in one, multiple compounding crises at this point. We have to be in community and we have to practice community, which means you do have to get to know people. That means you do have to be clear about like where you stand and where your tolerance lies with things and like how you can actually show up and support folks and like how to accept support, especially. But I think economics is like a really big way that we could support each other right now. Like, if you know somebody that needs groceries, like put in for that if you can. Or like if you know a food bank, go to the food bank together, right? Or like, yeah, watch somebody's kids, like you said.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I just want to add because I think sometimes people get caught up in like the bigger structural things. It also I remember my great aunt being like, I asked, "Oh, well, y'all didn't go to the grocery store for XYZ." And she's like, "Yeah, well, if we raise chickens and we needed sugar, we're just going to trade." Right? It's that simple. It doesn't have to be the biggest structure, right? But I'm going to trade with I got this and you got that and you want this and I want that. We're just going to trade. Shoot, I know people who've done that with getting their hair done in weed. I will give you some weed if you braid my hair. That's been some people's ministry, right? But bartering, exchanging what you have for what you need in a variety of instances, or what you want. Sometimes it ain't need, it's a want. Also works. And you don't have to be like, well, I can't employ anyone. Well, I don't have this. I don't have a bunch of money. But you might have something that someone else wants, and they might have something that you want, and you can just exchange it.
Mhm. Mm. So maybe one last question, because someone did ask, what are your thoughts on involving youth in this fight, particularly K through 12 students? So we could just give that little quick little yeah.
Because you saw my brain, I said, but K through 12, right, right, right. The babies are so curious and they do understand actually. So I like talk to the kids, y'all. Help the kids know how to read too, because it's really a literacy crisis out here. But talk to the kids. Like, shout out to Mary Annaïse Hegler, who actually has a children's book. I can't remember the name of it right now. I'll find it and drop it in the chat for kids to talk about and explain like the climate crisis. And she wrote it because of her nephew. It's really sweet, actually. But nevertheless, talk to the kids. They do understand. And I'll extend that beyond K through 12 because a lot of people use the youth in very interesting ways. And I'll just be real that as someone who like became an organizer in the midst of the youth climate movement, sort of in it, adjacent to it, the onus is not on young people alone to solve these issues. And I think the climate environmental movement is a very good example of people like pushing that onto us. Like, oh, sorry, we messed up. Y'all got it. No, we're all still here and alive. And a lot of us still will be here, even if we're not young people in like 50 years, 30 years. So, like, don't just push it onto the youth. And I don't think this person is saying that, but I want to be like very clear because folks are at the UN climate change conference right now. I realized we didn't talk about that, the Conference of Parties in Brazil. The US isn't even there. That's a whole nother conversation about Trump pulling us out of stuff. But young people have been like putting their bodies on the line across the world for over a decade now, very like in the limelight. And folks are still not been taking us seriously. So take the kids seriously, listen to the kids, read with the kids, talk to the kids about what it is. Like, oh, this is like, I don't know, like kids just understand. I don't think it actually is that complicated. Kids do understand. Kids go to school. They understand the water system, many of them. So if they can understand that, they can understand like this is how we got this far. Like we consume too much. We use this energy source and it's just not good for us. Like talk to the kids.
And I would say give them ways to that talk to them about also what you can do, right? I feel like growing up, I heard a lot of issues and I had a lot of feelings, right, about all the issues. And I liked historical fiction, so I read about so many issues. I was like, dang, it's really wild out here on Earth. But what didn't feel as clear to me was the avenue to shifting things. So talk to them about what is like a person, right? Like a person, like you would talk to anybody else about why this is like that and how this got like that. And also talk to them and let them know they have agency to shift it. That it's not inherent, it's not destined. And it's also not something that they only have to be in elected office, for example, to shift, that they can only shift this if they go to law school. There are a bunch of different ways that we can shift things. So make sure they also know that they have that agency to act in whichever ways feel most accessible for them in order to make the shifts we need.
Yes. Oh, this was so beautiful. I want to just thank you both for giving us all of your wisdom today, for talking to us about the work, for grounding us in actual campaigns that are happening where we live. I think that's really important. And also for bringing in that spiritual component. I think you all really did show that all of our issues are interconnected, they're related. And so I just want to thank y'all for that. And so it's 8 o'clock. I know folks want to go to bed. I know it's real dark outside, but we do have a final session on December 17th where we'll actually just be, well, not just, but we'll be having a healing session. So we've given you all theory and practicality, but we also want to show up in our care ethic and note that a lot of our people, to Destiny's point, are in crisis. They are suffering right now. And so we want to figure out what it means to come together to just let people feel and talk about that, grounded in our language. And so please join us for that. And if you, Brianna, Destiny, y'all have like a final closeout sentence, you want to drop a bar on them? I'll let you end us. Go ahead.
I do want to drive home that point about land and elements being sentient and having agency. And our indigenous spiritual traditions have like rode on that for very long, and they weren't wrong. They were never wrong. So yeah, I just really encourage folks to lean into that. And I think about, I didn't mention it earlier, but like I'm a PK, a preacher's kid, and a large part of like Abrahamic traditions actually talks about humans like having dominion over Earth. And a lot of indigenous traditions, of which maybe folks would name animism, like worshiping nature and like natural phenomenon, it's very clear that we're in reciprocal relationship, right? Like there's a give and take. You venerate your ancestors, you venerate these deities, they do things for you. It keeps them alive and well. Like we should see our environment in that way.
Brianna?
Nothing else to add, unless you're a nerd like me. And to the sentience thing, there's a whole scientific experiment about how atoms behave when they're being observed and when they're not. And that is, I mean, that's the basics right there. Go look it up if you're interested because you like to nerd out. I do, and I have a good time. And it's just so fascinating. But yeah, get into it and be in relationship with the elements.
All right, that's the closing word. So thank y'all so much. And thank you everyone who joined us tonight. I should probably
Yeah.
post
Thank you all. Have a good night.